also, I do think it's important to point out that the very people who usually, like politicians, who want to focus on, that like pro-minority messaging, and they then accuse others, whether it's candidates, voters, of being racist, sexist, homophobic. Usually they use that as a line of attack without really reflecting on how their own policies have actually carried out actions and like a system that codifies racism, codifies sexism, codifies, the Islamophobic behavior that we're seeing abroad, for instance, with the United States and its foreign policy. So I think it's also important to call out like just the shallowness of the argument, because it's used as a tool to like bludgeon political opponents. But we need to be able to like effectively message that they're the ones who have done something substantive in hurting various groups of disenfranchised people.
Yeah, so I mean, that's absolutely right. I think the two issues that ultimately did for Jeremy Corbyn in the end, one was Brexit, and the other was anti-Semitism. And these are issues where the left should be comfortable, right? Anti-racism and being at the front of a movement for maintaining what many, I think, wrongly see as a sort of international alliance, a cooperation between nation states, which is, progressive in some way. So how was Jeremy Corbyn defeated by two things, which ultimately that would be counterintuitive? He wasn't beaten because people don't want good public services or because they want to tax the rich. That wasn't what defeated him in the end. Now, I don't know if that would have be the same case in the US or whatever, if there was, say, Sanders, Trump in a presidential runoff. I can't say. What I can say is I think predictively, had that happened, Sanders' biggest problems wouldn't have been that he was going to tax the rich, wouldn't have been Medicare for all. It would have been people probing for an Achilles heel to his left, where he was weak, for instance, on gender rights or minority issues of some kind or something in his history. That's what they would have looked for. Now, Sanders, in a way, was better placed than Jeremy Corbyn because, of course, you have a different system. Jeremy Corbyn was in a parliamentary party. He had hundreds of colleagues willing to basically denigrate him publicly every day in a way that Sanders doesn't, right? In the presidential system, it's a bit different. So I think that's true. But in terms of the scoping out thing, New Labour in this country, probably more than the Democrats, actually, because, you had a Republican president from 2000 to 2008. New Labour in this country are responsible for some horrific racist policies, horrific. And the very same people who built Yarlswood Detention Centre, the very same people who introduced all manner of racist policies, effectively trying to isolate potentially radicalized Muslims from a very young age, 3, 4. The people that introduced these policies were calling a man who had, fought against apartheid, had been in every single demonstration for every single minority issue you can throw a stick at. They were calling him a racist. And like you say, Anna, I think that's something the left is going to have to sort of work out. How do we want to engage with these issues? I think the politically savvier people go, you know what, go screw yourself. I'm not going to play that game. But because most of the left were like, well, no, we're nice. We're good people. We don't say go screw yourself when somebody's bringing up minority issues. And I think that showed a lack of political education. More people need to be like that. Have a thicker skin. We're in politics against some really nasty bastards, really nasty people. And if you're an anti-racist, sometimes you're going to have to say to them when they're playing that game, you're talking crap, you don't mean it, you're the enemy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we spent 2 weeks of the primary election focusing on an accusation that Bernie Sanders told Elizabeth Warren that a woman can't win as president. It was a private conversation. We don't have a direct quote. But you're right. I mean, they didn't attack him policy-wise. They attacked him on something that has to do with gender that no one can prove. Yeah. And it was disgusting how the media jumped on that and wouldn't let it go for 2 weeks straight.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I'm sort of confronted with this sort of thing, when I've been confronted with this sort of thing with Corbyn, I would say, well, look, can that be proved in a court of law? No, you don't just no reasonable person goes, well, was there a witness? Is there a context to that behavior? Do they have previous? If that went to a court, that kind of pattern, they go, this one thing happened, but nobody else saw it. We say, get the hell out of here. And that's what we need to do as a movement on the left, right? Just don't take it seriously. And there's a fine line there. But if it's obvious that somebody has bad intentions and they've got no real case, tell them to go screw themselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I also want to say too that I think it also as part of being more savvy and adult, it also does have to even. I mean, I don't believe for a second that Bernie said that to her. I just don't buy it. There's no part of that story that makes any sense. But say he said it, so like that wouldn't be his greatest moment of his life. But are we not going to vote for single payer health care? Are we not going to vote like? It's ridiculous. And I think, again, in terms of just the sort of having some realism and humility, because, again, I think the other paradox about the way these things get wheeled out is that if we actually took them seriously, then we would recognize that we could all be implicated at them one time or another, and it's an ongoing process of evolution and change. And then that humility actually might make you, again, much more savvy, but also a lot more, forgiving and thoughtful, frankly. And I will say, I think the thread through Adolph Reed that kind of connects these things, though, is that it makes perfect sense why the Clintonites of the 1990s were pioneers in racism and race baiting and using specifically demonizing black people to show that they were quote unquote different kinds of Democrats, or that New Labor talked about dumping as literally migrants coming into the UK. And now they're the big, kind of like woke splainers of politics. And it's because those are both essentialist positions. I mean, those are both different ways. One is more ugly and destructive for sure, but they're different ways of slicing and dicing an electorate instead of building a movement. And not building on bonds and looking for areas of division that can reinforce at the end of the day what are, neoliberal policies. I almost feel like we have to stop using the term neoliberal, but at the end of the day, that's what it is.
I think there is a difference, though, between what's happened in the UK and the US, I think. So, for instance, one of the stories which has been documented, as I've talked about, a gentleman called Patrick Hennigan, senior member of management, who did what he did to Diane Abbott. I don't believe that would happen in the United States. I do think... Well, let me say why. If you look at the composition of senior management at the Labour Party, if you look at the people in employed staff roles, if you look at the bureaucrats of that party, if you look at the wider Labour movement in this country, of course, the Democrats and the Labour movement in the United States have problems with race. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But I think in this country, we're significantly further back. I think there's the absence of you might call a sort of a black elite politics in the US, which it doesn't really exist here. Probably because it's a far smaller part of the country's population. There's a different historical experience for obvious reasons. But I do not, the hatred which is expressed towards Diane Abbott, to Dawn Butler, to other black politicians. Clive Lewis is also in this document. There's a clear anti-black racism, which it's not subtle. There's not an undertone. So I agree with you. On the one hand, these guys try to sort of instrumentalize kind of woke politics. On the other hand, somebody who's like 55, some white dude who's never had a real job, he's only ever been in the Labour Party. He even if he wanted to, he can't do that, Michael. So it's a bit of a funny one.
I get it. I mean, I think you're probably right, but I would say that if you really get into at least the ancillary Democratic Party elite treatment of Nina Turner and Breonna Joy Gray, I mean, it's not only is it there, it's public. So if you feel comfortable doing that kind of game playing publicly, I can only speculate what you're saying behind the scenes. But I think to some extent you're probably right, just in terms of kind of relative social progress. But I think the ethos is almost one-to-one.
Well, I think if you had you have Barack Obama, right? I think if Barack Obama, was in the room when somebody said that, he would say, for instance, and I don't agree with many of his political positions, he would say that's not okay. And I do suspect that there's not that presence that you have in the Democratic Party, which is important, by the way, in the age of Trump, because those people are going to be vital in getting enough of the minority vote to defeat the Republicans. I don't think these people in Labour in this country could do that, and that's a big difference.